Marhaba and welcome to Free Palestine Pod, the podcast. I'm Lama Bazzari.
And I'm Lina Hadi. Each week, we will bring you in-depth commentary from Palestine.
Let's talk Palestine. Welcome to Free Palestine Pod. Today on the show, we welcome the well-recognized South African artist, activist, and educator, Adam Broomberg. Also joining us from Al Khalil in Hebron, the occupied West Bank, is the human rights defender and activist, Issa Amro, who is also the founder of Youth Against Settlements. Marhaba, Adam and Issa, and welcome to Free Palestine Pod. Let's talk Palestine.
Hello, Issa. The last time I saw you was in 2017 in Westminster, in London, at the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, as you recall. And it looks like the situation has worsened since 2017, and all the aspirations and hopes and that all of the Palestinians and even the Israelis had at the time have completely collapsed. So I was wondering, do you think that there might be any hope with the latest and greatest Israeli government this year?
We have hope in ourselves. We have hope on the solidarity groups who are supporting the Palestinian cause. And we have hope that new generation in Palestine and all over the world will act according to the international law and act according to their morals and principles. This is the hope we have. We don't have any hope in the Israeli fascist apartheid dictatorship governments. Today and yesterday, the Israelis, for the first time, voted for the most right-wing, extremist, fascist government ever. And one government by another, they are all working to suppress the Palestinians, making our life harder and harder, and keep oppressing us and implementing their apartheid policy, and for sure, working to displace us from our land and make it very hard for us as Palestinians to stay and remain in our cities, in our villages, and even in our houses. We as Palestinians, we are facing ethnic cleansing, but the hope we have, it's us, it's you, and it's everybody who's watching us and act and make the struggle against Israeli apartheid and occupation part of their daily routine and make it costly for the Israeli occupiers and for the Israeli oppressors.
Thank you.
Adam, you were in occupied Hebron recently, and you were also assaulted by Israeli settlers. Can you tell us about your incident and your visit and the situation on the ground?
The situation on the ground, I think Issa is much better qualified to describe, because I have the privilege of coming and going for 1 week every month, but then I get out. It did feel to me that things were a lot more tense. It also felt to me that the kind of cozy relationship that I already saw many times that exists between the IOF, the military, Israeli military, and the settlers was much tighter. The first-hand experience was Issa's center, the Youth Against Settlement Center, is like a beacon of hope, surrounded by this kind of toxic, violent aggression that comes from the settlers. And it started when one of Issa's colleagues and I were walking just from the car towards the center, and we were literally kind of surrounded by kids, I'd say between the age of about 6 and 17. And that's a strategy that's used by the settlers, because even me with my Jewish privileged body, if I had to lay a finger on these, I would be arrested at best by the military. You can imagine if Issa or any of his colleagues had to do the same. I mean, that's practically death sentence. So this is a clear strategy that they use. And these kids it's tragic to see, because they are weaponized, they're utilized by the community, but they're not what a lot of Israelis describe them as, is this kind of lunatic fringe. They're very much part of the fiber of the institution. And so I don't think we should see them as any different to any other Israeli citizen. They're very much part of who the government represents, and they are a clear example. What happened right there, watching how commander of H2 and other soldiers literally stood by while I was attacked, a few of Issa's colleagues was attacked, phones were stolen, property was damaged, and they stood by and watched. And it was just clear testimony of absolute Jewish supremacy, is that there are two laws, and we know that. And so it was just such a clear illustration of, some people want to use the apartheid a term, other occupation. I see it as Jewish supremacy and all of the others.
Issa, your home was Khalil, which has been under attack by Israeli settlers regularly, and including this week, has been declared a closed military zone by the Israeli occupation army. Can you elaborate on the situation?
Not only my home was attacked, many Palestinian houses, many Palestinian farmers all over West Bank and East Jerusalem were attacked by the Israeli settlers. And we are facing a lot of violence without any accountability to the Israeli settlers, who have full impunity by the Israeli government and by the Israeli system. As Adam described, we as Palestinians, we are under the Israeli military law, which means that we are guilty till we are proven innocent. And Israeli settlers who live close by illegally, according to the international law, especially Geneva Convention, Article 49, they live under the Israeli civilian law. So there is two sets of law in the same area for different people. So legally, we, the Palestinians, are like this. They are much higher legally against that. We face that violence every day. So I was attacked physically many times by the Israeli settlers. Many Palestinians in Hebron were attacked by the Israeli settlers many times. What is strange that the Israeli army protect them and back them up and even guide them sometimes to attack other Palestinians. We saw all over West Bank soldiers, company settlers to burn Palestinian land, to burn Palestinian olive trees, to attack Palestinians. In Hebron, even the soldier gave his phone to the Israeli settlers to film us when he was trying to punish us. In Hebron, I was hit all over my body. They stole the phone of my friend. They smashed the phone of another kid. They threw stones. They did everything which is very violent to us as Palestinians. I filmed that. I called the Israeli police. I went to the Israeli police 3 times, but the Israeli police didn't accept my complaint to that level, that we are attacked, we are oppressed by the Israeli settlers violently, physically, verbally. And then the Israeli police refused to take the complaint from me. And each time I go, they pretend they are busy. They tell me, come back another day, another hour, and to make me feel that they don't care about me. And really, they don't care about me. And then after that, continuous attacks for 10 days from Israeli settlers. It was every day, every morning, even 3-4 times a day. The Israeli military came to the house, came to the community center where I live and where we use it as a non-violence hub to educate internationals about what is happening in Palestine, and declared it as a closed military zone. And as you see now, I'm alone in the house. I'm the only one who's allowed. I don't have any other activists. I don't have visitors. I don't have my neighbors to come. So I am isolated. I'm not alone. Many other Palestinian families, they feel the same. And we see a real wave of violence from the Israeli settlers toward Palestinians without any accountability from the Israeli government, the Israeli police, and even from the international community. We see silence all over the world without any real accountability to the Israeli political leaders. And even now, the Kahanists, the fascists, won in the election, and nobody's talking about that. Nobody's saying, let's talk to Israel and tell it this is not acceptable. Itamar Ben-Gvir should not be in a government, as they do with the Palestinians. Each time somebody from the international community tell me, what about Palestinian election? They tell me, what is the alternative? I tell them, we want democracy, and we Palestinians should have the right to vote, and we should have the right to choose our leadership. We don't want Israel to choose our leadership. We don't want any other country to choose our leadership for us. But this is what is happening now on the ground for Palestinians. Settler violence, Israeli army oppression, and Palestinians don't have any protection and even no at all official support to the Palestinian people.
Thank you. Adam, circling back on Jewish supremacy, I'm one of the co-founders of the Palestine Lobby. And in addition to that, I train many activists all over Central Europe and the United States. And the big question that these young activists are constantly asking me is, how can we defend the Palestinian cause when they are constantly accusing us of anti-Semitism. Of course, we know that we are not anti-Semitic, but I'd like to pose this question to you because you are, in fact, I mean, I'm Semitic too, but you are, in fact, Jewish, and you understand the whole history of anti-Semitism and protecting the Jews from a Second World War II, etc. But the big question is, how can we combat this as activists and as adversaries of the Palestinian cause?
So just to add to the kind of the minestrone of my background that you described. So I'm a third generation Holocaust survivor. I also grew up in South Africa and was an anti-apartheid activist. So I have a kind of unique mix of ingredients, which makes me slightly more entitled to talk about this issue than other people, because first of all, it's harder to suggest that I'm anti-Semitic when I lost 98% of my family in the Holocaust. It's harder to accuse me of a misunderstanding of comparing what's going on in Palestine subjected by Israel and comparing it to apartheid when I have firsthand experience of apartheid. And in fact, if anything, to be really honest, what I've seen certainly in Hebron and more recently even in Bethlehem and other occupied territories, it's way worse than apartheid. So I think already that comparison is outdated. But just to talk back to this idea, and then the other accusation when they run out of arguments of calling you a self-loathing Jew, right? A self-hating Jew. What I do think is that these arguments are running out of steam. I think it's becoming a combination of social media that people are actually really seeing, the hour-to-hour atrocities that are being committed, literally every hour. I think also that the 2018 nation-state law that was passed, which gave the right of determination, self-determination to Jews and Jews only, is an absolute legal description of Jewish supremacy. And I think also that inscribed in that law was that the Jewish settlements are of a national value, and also the nation state would do as much as possible to kind of develop and establish these settlements. So I think legally, if you examine the facts, there's nothing to argue with. Apartheid is a legal term. Occupation is a legal term. Jewish supremacy is not. And it's a term I've come across via some colleagues and activists. I think it's easier for me as a Jew to be talking about Jewish supremacy, but I think it's a really interesting term to use because it's really relatable to kind of what's going on in America, for instance. And I think people can kind of understand. And as Issa said, and law in 2018, it's clear that there are two tiers of society. And what we're seeing is absolute Jewish supremacy. With the new government now, it's gone even further. I mean, putting Ben Gvir into government is the equivalent of putting a member of the Ku Klux Klan into the Senate. In his hood, literally. I mean, this is a person who, until recently, had a picture of Baruch Goldstein, the famous mass murderer and terrorist who in 1994 killed 29 Palestinians and injured, I think, 125, and only took it down, a great big portrait of him in his living room, because he knew he was heading towards government and had to kind of appear less of a psychotic racist. But yeah, but I hope that answers your question. I mean, I think also, and just going back to the first question, which about my experiences, what I really learned there, and I really think that speaking to what Issa was saying is, I think who's in government in Israel is of little consequence, because anyone I asked in Palestine about the election was like, they couldn't imagine things getting worse. It's unimaginable. So who cares who's in government? Because it cannot get worse, right? And perhaps with Ben Gvir and his colleagues who are both homophobic, and he's outspoken in his desire to literally exterminate the Palestinians, things could get worse. But perhaps also it's a moment where there's none of this kind of liberal posing, where you had those videos of Netanyahu saying, I care more about the Palestinians than the Palestinian leaders and crap like that. And for the first time, actually, here, you've got people who have spoken about extermination, about getting rid of an indigenous population, and they're in government. And if it's that clear, perhaps the argument against apartheid or accusing people who talk about apartheid as being anti-Semitic, it doesn't matter anymore. It's very clear.
Issa, a question for you. For people unfamiliar with daily life for Palestinians in Al-Khalil, in Hebron, listeners who are unfamiliar with how much the occupation and Israeli settler expansion is undermining daily life for Palestinians, for Palestinian children going to school. Can you please share with us?
Yes, Hebron is a macrosome, of the Israeli occupation. If you come to Hebron, you understand the reality of the Israeli occupation all over West Bank. In Hebron, you will find checkpoints. We have 22 checkpoints in less than 1 square kilometer. We have more than 100 movement barriers. We have around 1,800 shops closed because of the Israeli military closure policy. More than 1,000 Palestinian apartments became empty because of the closure policy. The Palestinian ambulance can't come here to my house without a special permit. So you skip all the emergency cases. Craftsperson, electrician, plumber, physician, they are not allowed to come here without a special permit. My friends, they need a permit to come to visit me in my neighborhood. And now they are not allowed because of the closed military zone or area and closing the area. Water, we have shortage of water. We have shortage of electricity. We are not allowed to drive in our own roads. We are not allowed to walk in our own roads and certain roads in the city. They changed the names of the Palestinian streets from Palestinian Arabic names to an Israeli Hebrew names in our lifetimes. You see Israeli flags all over our neighborhoods, and we as Palestinians are not allowed to raise our flag as Palestinians. We are not allowed to practice any kind of community activism. It's illegal. Non-violence resistance, according to the Israeli military law, is illegal. In the city, people are socially separated. We are segregated. We really face settler violence all the time. Each time I pass the checkpoint, sometimes I pass 2 to 3 checkpoints to reach my house, 2 and 3 checkpoints to reach the Ibrahimi Mosque. The soldiers, they threaten you at the checkpoint. Sometimes they delay you for hours. Sometimes they just tell you to go back. And many times they close the checkpoint. In the Hebron city, they close the wholesale market, the vegetable market, the fruits market, carpet market, blacksmith market, gold market. All these markets are closed by the Israeli military, and we don't have a space to change that or to resist that. And I call everybody watching us and listening to us now to come and visit Hebron and visit West Bank to see by her or his eyes the Israeli reality of occupation and apartheid and segregation and separation. In Hebron, the policy is they don't evict you directly, but they make it impossible for you to stay and remain because you don't feel safe in the house, you don't get enough services, and you feel that you are alone. On the other hand, the Israeli settlers just next to my house here, they live in a luxury life, quality life, on the expense of our basic human rights as Palestinians. It's not at all about security. It's about supremacy, it's about apartheid, and it's about that the Israeli occupation is trying to take more and more Palestinian land in Hebron, in East Jerusalem, and in West Bank, and in all over Palestine. They don't want us to be here. This is what the settlers tell me. Many settlers came to my house and they had their children with them. And one of them told me, Issa, I'm not able to take you out from your house now, but I promise you that my child will take you out. And they see that in the Israeli election results that fascism is growing, extremists are now controlling Israel, and we as Palestinians left alone, and Israel is getting a lot of blind support from many governments in the world.
Lina, I wonder if I could just add one point to your previous question about the anti-Semitic accusation when somebody is critical of Zionism, which is one of my heroes is the poet and theorist Fred Moten. And he puts it really perfectly when he says, how is it possible that outspoken anti-Semites like Donald Trump or Pat Robertson are vehement supporters of Zionism and the nation state of Israel? How can that be? That seems totally contradictory. And he said that these things are clearly not antithetical to each other. They go together. And the reason is because the nation state of Israel has become the kind of perfect little icon for the idea of the nation state. And while the rest of the world was going through a process of decolonization, here was a very contemporary colonial project where 750,000 indigenous members of the population were expelled to make space for people who had never lived in this country. And what's so interesting about what he says is that, of course, we have to have solidarity with Palestinians, but also that potentially the nation state of Israel is the most dangerous thing for world Jewry at this point. Because the minute it becomes too much of a liability, morally and economically, for any force, which is what happened in apartheid. The end of apartheid came not because there was some kind of moral revelation. I mean, Thatcher and Reagan were staunch supporters of apartheid. There wasn't a sudden moral awakening. The government was broke. And because it stopped being supported because the Cold War ended, right? And that's going to happen. And life is a long game. And we know the right side of history. And at some point, when Israel stops being backed up by these regimes, that is going to be potentially an even more scary scenario for world Jewry than experienced in the last century.
I can definitely imagine that, unfortunately. I personally feel that Zionists hijacked Judaism. I don't think that Zionism, I'm more along the lines of Ilan Pappé and Noam Chomsky. I really don't think that Zionism and Judaism have anything to do with each other. Aside from the little fact that even the founding fathers, I mean, there were Christian Zionists even 100 years ago, 150 years ago. So I really think that they've hijacked Judaism and they use the fact that they went through this horrendous Holocaust as propaganda for them to be able to create this nation state. I mean, it's such a pity. But on that note, as you can imagine, the Palestinians on a whole need serious rebranding, Adam. And there has got to be a way that we can explain the actual narrative of what took place 74 years ago. Oh, and by the way, according to many experts right now, they are already using the 1 million for the Nakba number in 1948, and they are almost confident that it was well over 1 million. And that doesn't take into account all of the Palestinians that were killed, because there were quite a few killed. This was all unaccounted for expressly by the Zionists. I mean, they're very good at manipulating statistics, but just on that note. So we definitely need rebranding the Palestinians on a whole, for sure. The government, the people, we've been exposed to Zionist propaganda since 1917, basically, since the Balfour Declaration. So how are we going to tell the true story about the hostile takeover that happened 74 years ago? What suggestions? I mean, how can we rebrand the Palestinian cause?
I'm not so sure a case of rebranding as aligning the cause in an intersectional solidarity way, because what we're seeing is that this young generation is awakening to indigenous thought, to Black voices, to LGBTQI communities. And I think these intersectional struggles are, for me, what's happening. My students and immediately see the similarities. So it doesn't need to be rebranded. The revision of history has already been written. And there's 3 books you need to read to get to the facts, really. What I do think is happening, and I can see, and Issa's been very instrumental in this, because on a daily basis for the last many years, in the very courtyard he's sitting, he's hosted many young progressive Jewish groups coming from the States. When I was there was a group of so-called progressive Israeli rabbis, and Issa did not hold back in speaking very clearly to them. But I think that there is a growing movement and an awareness in this generation who are fighting the patriarchy, and part of that is listening to indigenous thoughts. And so it's not about rebranding as much as people hearing. And I think the onus is not on the Palestinians to rebrand history. The responsibility is of the world to listen and to ignore the kind of what's becoming less and less believable propaganda that is spewed out by the Zionist lobby. And so I don't think it's our responsibility or Palestinian responsibility to rebrand it. I think it's about demanding the right to be heard.
I get that, demanding the right to be heard, but in places like the United States and in some Central European countries, Palestinians and the state of Palestine aren't even recognized. And when you are having discussions with people in the United States, I mean, the narrative has been so whitewashed that if we never even existed, or we're supposed to be Jordanian or Lebanese or Syrian or what have you. But there definitely needs to be, I mean, Palestine has got to get back on the map with the United States. Our officials who most recently visited Washington weren't even allowed official visits. I mean, none of us were not recognized, in my opinion, due to 100+ years of very strong Zionist propaganda, which is anti-Palestinian. So it's become to the point where, in the United States, if you say you're Palestinian, they're going to assume you're from Palestine, Texas. Seriously. I mean, that was my childhood. And when you tell them, no, my mother was born in Nazareth, Palestine, they tell you, no, that doesn't exist. I mean, they will tell you Palestine doesn't exist. So I think that those are the smarter ones. And the others will just say, well, it's in the source, only Bethlehem exists. I mean, they say literally things like that. That's how whitewashed the entire history of the Palestinians has been. Obviously, in Europe, you have more of an intellectual population, so they at least know that there was a Palestine. It's just that today they're refusing to accept the Palestine. I mean, yesterday I was lobbying with some Austrians and they're quite scary, so they understand that they're historically existed, but today, in their opinion, they don't exist. It's problematic. So that's when I say rebranding, it's just to actually get the actual true narrative out. Yeah, I mean, because we're losing all of our Nakba survivors now. So even getting those narratives out is becoming harder and harder of what actually happened in 1948. And I do feel like we need some rebranding. And I feel that we've been extremely underserved. And I don't blame it on our government. I blame it on the Israelis. So yeah, and I don't know. I feel that you would definitely be a part of the rebranding because you are so well received from all of the Anglo-Saxon world. And that's great for us. There's so far few people like you on our side, as you probably know.
One of the great assets that we've had in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years is the grassroots movement in the US, that are youth-led on college campuses through organizations such as Jewish Voice for Peace, If Not Now org.
Issa, what's your opinion? Because you've interacted with a lot of these groups, certainly more than me. I mean, both from America and so-called progressives coming to you from Israel. What's your feeling?
First, I want to be very clear that Israel is not defending itself. Israel is defending its occupation and its settlements, and Palestinians are stateless and will live without any basic human rights. It's one side oppression and one side apartheid and one side occupation. On the other hand, Palestinians are not silent. Me and many other Palestinians are using non-violence resistance, non-violence campaigning to make the Israeli occupation and apartheid costly. We use direct action, sit-ins, we do rallies, we do advocacy, we do tours, we try to increase the awareness, we invite figures and celebrities, we do projects as the project me and you, Adam, are doing these days. I'm very optimistic because I see a lot of people are moving in the United States. I see a lot of people all over the world are moving, and celebrities are really giving us more attention. And I see many Jewish progressive groups are coming to Palestine and hearing the Palestinian narrative. They want to ask more questions about the Palestinians. This is why we are attacked, Adam. This is why the settlers don't like us. This is why the army is closing this kind of community center, because they want to suppress and oppress even our peaceful voices. They don't want us to reach the international community. They don't want us to talk in this kind of pods and programs. Many American Jews are moving. Many American progressive solidarity groups all over. We need only to work to get more celebrities to Palestine and transform the public opinion to political support to Palestine. And I think the United States is moving and many countries are moving. But we, the Palestinians and the solidarity groups, we should not give up. We should stay firm, strong, and stubborn until we get our freedom, justice, and equality according to the international law and according to everybody, morals and principles. This is what we want as Palestinians. We see people are moving. I hope the people who are listening to us learn more about Palestine, ask more questions, come and see the occupation, and come and make the struggling against the occupation part of their daily routine. Anything, any small action for Palestine makes a huge difference for us. We, the Palestinians who are using non-violence resistance, we need protection, we need support, and we need backup from the people who are outside Palestine to really make the occupation costly and expose it and really make the settlers and the Israeli fascists and the Israeli extremists accountable for their fascism, for their occupation, and for their apartheid.
Issa, do you see, honestly, an alternative to the Palestinian Authority today?
The alternative for the Palestinian Authority is democracy. The Palestinians are really, we are very educated. We have very capable Palestinians to lead. Palestinians are ready to do democracy. What prevented us is the Palestinian Authority leaders who are backed up by the Israeli government and many other governments in the world. We were going to have election last year for the Palestinian Legislative Council, but it was cancelled because the corrupt Palestinian leaders and the dictators were supported by the Israeli government and by many other governments, unfortunately, that we don't have democracy. For sure, we have alternative. Palestinians are really capable. The Palestinians are qualified to lead themselves and to choose their own leadership away from the occupation and away from the intervention of other countries and put rules in our votes. We want to choose our leadership according to our standards and according to whom we think will work with us to get freedom, justice, and equality using non-violence resistance as the best methodology to achieve our goals as the Palestinian people.
But Issa, do you really think that it's the PA that's avoiding democratic elections and not the state of Israel? Because my understanding is that it's the state of Israel and the United States that won't allow the Palestinians inside occupied Palestine to actually have these elections.
Yes, for sure. The Israeli government didn't allow the election in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem, but that was not the only reason. They were afraid of the results because they knew that a new leadership will come out, and even it was a progressive leadership, and many people who are even from Fatah, they were winning the election away from the mainstream PLO leadership. We as Palestinians, I am not young, but we have many young Palestinians. They are keen and they want really to participate in decision making and to choose their qualification to make a change. Unfortunately, our leadership is really tired, and Israel and the supporters of the PA and the supporters of Israel, they don't want to allow us to have another election. We as Palestinians, we want democracy and we want a young leadership according to our charter and according to our legal system.
I cannot stress how important Issa's Center is as a space of calm discussion, like discursive discussion. And I also just want to stress how important Issa is within H2, within the whole of Hebron, because every time there is a situation that rises above boiling temperature and Issa arrives, it's diffused. And he seems to command respect from anyone who's in the environment. And I think that the most urgent thing is for us to work towards the center being opened and to constantly have Issa's back, because that is so important. And my last wish to communicate is to anybody from my background. The one thing I learned fighting apartheid was that we need to use our privilege, and in our case, my Jewish privilege, to assist in the situation. And I've got to say, I feel a whole lot safer anywhere in occupied Palestine, Bethlehem, Hebron, Ramallah, wherever it is, than I do in Israel. And I'm begging people of Jewish origin to come just have a look, because it takes 20 minutes to understand, as Issa said, the occupation. And if you can give a few days where you can actually just use your privilege and show solidarity, that's going to be of huge impact.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful, both of you. I know that it's extremely delicate and sensitive times in occupied Palestine right now.
Thank you for joining us this week on Free Palestine Pod. Subscribe, like, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter.
And be sure to come back next week for a new episode of Free Palestine Pod. Let's talk Palestine.